I think with each interview that I show, I know that it's not just sharing their story, but it's the family legacy. It's preserving that period of time and that conflict or that war, but it's also that person.
I'm laying there just before the burst, and I had a bullet go through the brim of my SEAL helmet, and I felt the air of the bullet on my ear. You can't get much closer than that.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm John Fenzel, founder of Heroes Path, and I'm really glad that you're here tonight for I think it's our fourth webinar now, Stories of Service, a conversation with Zach Dunn, and you can see Zach Dunn on the screen right there. Every day, we lose more and more of the men and women who quite literally save the world. With every passing veteran, another voice of courage, sacrifice, wisdom, they all fade from living memory. And so all that's left are books and recordings. So at the same time, the headlines that we all read remind us that the lessons of World War II, unity, leadership, moral clarity, aren't relics of history. They're warnings and they're guidelines for the world that we live in right now. So that's why tonight, I think, matters. Listening to these stories shouldn't at all be confused for nostalgia, and frequently it is, because ultimately it's our responsibility, and it's a big one. We're joined by someone who embodies that conviction, Zach Dunn, the founder of Global Veteran Stories. Zach is from the Toronto area, and as we speak, though, he's out west in Calgary, traveling across Canada to meet and record our World War II veterans. It's just his latest stop in his mission, his personal mission, to preserve all the voices before time takes them from us. There are worse places to be than Calgary, but few better reasons to be there, right, Zach?
Absolutely. I'm Canadian, but it's even chilly up here. I'm not going to lie. Even though it's the end of October, I got to wear a couple layers up here.
Yeah, I was up in Maine recently, and I had the same experience as you. But for those of you who don't know, Zach, over the past 4 years, it might be even more than that, Zach, I don't know, you've interviewed more than 100 veterans from across 14 countries. And they've not just been World War II veterans, they've been Korea, Vietnam, and probably some other wars we don't even know about. His work has been featured on Canadian television, on Legion magazine, through collaborations with lots and lots of museums and schools across North America. He uses the simplest tools, and I love this, a smartphone, a tripod, and just deep respect for all of his interviewees. And there you go. It's
That's about
wonderful.
it.
You know, I've got mine here, and I'll tell you, it works great, especially with today's current technology. His videos are reaching millions of younger viewers who might otherwise never have heard these stories. So before we begin, just a quick note for those who are watching. We're going to hold all the questions until the end, but please, if you do have questions, send them through the Q&A panel as they occur to you, and I'll gather them for our discussion later. That panel is down at the bottom of your screen. So, Zach, thanks very much for joining us, and we're just honored to have you here with us.
John, thank you so much for this opportunity. I think these veteran stories and their memories really deserve to be preserved because they are slowly leaving us. I think our average World War II veteran was in their late 90s. Average is 100 years old now. And they sacrifice so much for us, for our freedoms that we enjoy every single day. For me, it's just one way that I can thank them by sitting with them for any amount of time that they like and recording their stories. And again, sharing them with schools and museums and as well as on social media with so many different people around the world. I think it's been a great journey for me personally. I've just been a big fan of history, but given this opportunity to sit down with these veterans has really just been a blessing.
Great. Well, Zach, without further ado, why don't you just go ahead and launch into your presentation?
John, thank you so much for the opportunity to share my project and obviously these kind of veterans. What I have planned is I have a couple pictures, I have a couple videos of the World War II, the Korean War, and some of the Vietnam War veterans that I have interviewed. And just want to give everyone that's listening and watching the recording later how this project even started, my general interests, and then how it's really grown to much more than I ever imagined, really. It first started off by my granddad. In early of 2021, I was cleaning out my parents' basement and found some old pictures and an old photo album. and discovered, my granddad was a World War II veteran. Went over to my aunt's house. There was a big display of his medals. And I asked my mom, I said, did granddad ever talk about his time in the service? And he said no. It was something that they really didn't talk about, but he was a paratrooper. So I decided he was born in 1921. And that October, he would have been 100 years old. Unfortunately, he passed away when I was about 3.5, so I didn't get to know many of his stories. So I said, okay, well, I want to preserve his memory, his legacy. So I gathered my 5 aunts, my 2 uncles, and my mom, and sat down and just asked them, tell me about granddad. What kind of man was he? What did he like doing? How did he first come to Canada? And did he ever share about his experience during the war? Found out later that, again, he was served in the British Airborne. He joined up right when the war started in 1939, and found out later he served in Northern Africa. Then he served in France and Germany. I just was reaching out to a couple different libraries and found out that he dropped on D-Day. He was part of the sort of casualties and injury report on D-Day. Again, this is a humble man from London, England, that never talked about his time in the service. He told my mom that he just lost too many good mates. And this was something that I took with me. I said, okay, he was born in 1921. Is there other veterans out there in my community in Southern Ontario? Is there other veterans that I could possibly meet? And this is when the idea kind of started. I found basically an article online that showcased World War II veteran telling his stories. And I said, wow, I have to meet this man. He was 96 at the time, so just a youngster. And he was saying that he was the youngest of 12 siblings growing up on a farm in Southern Ontario. And he asked his mother's consent to join the service at 17. And by the age of 18, he was flying bomber missions over Germany in a Lancaster and a Wellington bomber plane. And I'll see if I can play this first clip here, and just to give you an idea of what kind of man Arnold Graham was. And Arnold was interviewed a few times just by some local newspaper reporters, but this was his first opportunity actually sharing his story on video. And this was a big opportunity for me. I was only 21 at the time, so I was very green, very nervous to meet and interview this veteran, but I think it turned out quite well. Again, a wonderful World War II veteran, and my first veteran interview. This is the story of Arnold Graham.
My mother gave my permission for me to join because I was underage. I joined up when I was 17. And when I was 18, I was flying in bombing missions over Germany. The most horrible scene of the war, to see what was going on.
In September of 1939, Canada joined the fight in World War II against Germany. At the time, a 14-year-old Arnold Graham watched and waited as his 6 brothers enlisted to fight for their country.
I was flying out of England, a porcupine squadron. I had one brother stationed in Scotland, another one in France and Germany, 2 in Italy, 1 in Kiska in the Aleutian Islands, and 1 in Canada. We were spread out all over the world.
Eager to serve alongside his brothers at just 17 years of age, Arnold asked his mother's consent to join Canada's military.
The only mid-upper gunner to shoot down 3 German fighters during missions. And again, when the war ended, he was just still 19 years old. Arnold never opened up about his time in the service until many years later, but this was the first interview that I did. And it's catalyzed this project that went month by month. What I did was I started calling my local legions, reaching out to newspaper reporters, seeing if there's any World War II veterans that want to meet with a 22-year-old, ask them a couple questions and record their stories just to share with people on social media. and preserve them for the next generation. In February of 2022, I ended up interviewing a veteran who was 100 years old at the time. His name is Ken May, born and raised just outside of Toronto, and served in Italy only for a few months before his platoon came under fire, and he was shot 10 times and ended up surviving to tell the tale. So each step, each legion I called, there was a new veteran. Each town that I traveled to, there was a brand new story that I got to post and share, sometimes for the very first time. A lot of these veterans never shared their story before, which was an honor to be able to share. I'll
Great.
play the clip.
Most important of all was securing complete control of the Mediterranean. Even after clearing the Axis out of North Africa and overrunning Sicily in 38 days, our shipping was still threatened by Axis air attacks from the Italian mainland. Our second objective, to exploit Mussolini's overthrow by knocking Italy out of the war. Despite heavy enemy fire, the first wave swarmed ashore with timetable precision. But before we could consolidate our positions, the Germans intensified their attacks.
I'm laying there, and just before I got out, they opened up another burst, and I had a bullet go through the brim of my SEAL helmet, and I felt the air of the bullet on my ear. You can't get it much closer than that.
Wow.
So Ken May lived to be 102, actually. Just an incredible man. And he was able to share his story right up until he passed away. This was a story that wasn't shared until very recently. Each legion that I called, there was a brand new story. Was very lucky and fortunate enough on my fourth interview to meet and interview a World War II veteran that landed on D-Day on Juno Beach with the Canadians. This was only my fourth or fifth interview. I was still very green. But I kept going. I kept saying, is there more veterans out there? Who wants to meet with me? And what can I do to preserve their stories? Jim Parks here, born in 1924. He's going to be 101. Actually, he just turned 101 this past September and served with the Winnipeg Rifles. Again, my project started off just interviewing Canadian veterans. And then towards the end of 2023, I discovered Zoom and being able to interview veterans over Zoom if they were tech savvy enough or if they had someone to set it up for them. Then in early sort of 2023, 2024, I started interviewing Korean War veterans. Unfortunately, here in Canada, history classes, we only have one of them in grade 10. And a lot wasn't shared about World War II. Nothing was shared about the Korean War. And little to nothing was shared about the Vietnam War. Calling one of the legions, they said, we have a Korean War veteran that wants to meet with you. And I said, what is the Korean War? Wasn't even familiar with it until I did a little bit of research and met this wonderful man, Wally Cavan, actually born in Michigan, but came to Canada when he was a kid and served in the Navy. Born and raised just outside of Detroit, and hopped over the border and joined with the U.S. Marines and was sent to Vietnam in the late 1960s. Their kind of perspectives really opened up my eyes of, again, this always goes back to how grateful I am for our freedoms that we enjoy. These kids, the 17, 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-olds, were so young, so green, they really didn't know what they were getting themselves into, but they knew there was a purpose for this war, for that conflict. And they were willing to join in so many different areas. I think my project has grown to share these unique stories. I've interviewed a lot of female veterans from World War II, whether they were nurses or they stayed on the home front. They worked in a factory building planes. This is really the purpose of this project, to get those stories, to get people to open up. Even very recently, again, sharing these stories on social media, I've had people reach out to me saying, my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother, my uncle served, and we don't know what questions to ask, or they've never shared their story. I think it's really important for these veterans to open up, and that's what I've been trying to do. A lot of the times, veterans don't want to share their story until you ask the right questions. This sort of happened 2 years ago. There was a local World War II veteran, again, that's never been interviewed, but he had such a unique story. And later, a book was written about him. And his name is Rex Arnett. He was a wireless operator on I was actually an American plane, B-24 Liberators. And he was incredibly lucky. He flew 23 missions with his crew and only missed one mission. He was a very lucky man and ended up living to 101 years old. So I'll share this next clip of Rex Arnett.
From Ploiești to Paramaribo, from France to the Philippines, makers of many of this war's headlines have been B-24 Liberators and the men who fly and fight them.
On the night of February the 18th, we did a trip, I think it was to Dusseldorf, where we're doing jamming aircraft, the anti-aircraft guns and things around that target. And when I came back, I was spitting up blood. I had a bad cough of bronchitis, but we were on the battle order the next night on the 20th. So I said, well, I'll do that flight and then I'll check with the doctor. The guys said, you're nuts, you should go and see the doctor now, you might have some real damage. So they grounded me. Another chap took my place and they got shot down that night.
But in the meantime, I've got a question here from Hector Tristini. He says,
Absolutely.
He says, hi, John and Zach. How do you find the veterans that you interview and what is their reaction when you reach them?
Yeah, it's a lot of different ways. I think even more recently, I've had a lot of people on social media message me, email me, and say, "Hey, this is a great project. My grandfather's a World War II veteran, or Vietnam or Korean War. Do you want to interview them?" With sometimes it's legions or newspaper articles. So and so veteran turns 100 or 104 or whatever the case may be, and yeah, that's kind of how it started. Cold calling legions is what I used to do very early on, just emailing them saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. The reactions are actually quite good from veterans, I would say, in the last sort of couple years. There was a quote that a veteran kind of told me not too long ago, and he said it takes between 50 to 60 years for veterans typically to open up about their time in the service. What they've experienced, it takes a lot of time to process what they went through, and to be able to open up and share that in a different way. So I think the reaction's been actually quite good. There was a Korean War veteran that said no initially, and then we kept in contact and built a sort of a relationship and a friendship, and then he ended up saying yes to the interview, and that ended up being one of the best ones I've done. So yeah, it's a lot of different ways, people reaching out to me, and I think the few of the funniest ones is, again, this is my full-time job, but I used to work with someone that played golf with Rex Arnett. Meanwhile, he was 99 years old, still playing golf. And we just got to chat, and he said, oh, I golf with someone who's 99. He might be a World War II veteran you can interview. So, again, it comes in a lot of different ways, a lot of funny ways. But overall, I think the reaction's been quite good from, meeting and interviewing these veterans. So that's a great question, Hector. Yeah.
Great. All right.
And as the kind of story goes, now we're in kind of 2023. I was very fortunate to interview and meet my first sort of prisoner of war, or POW. This was a huge kind of a deal because a lot of veterans talked about their time in the service, but a lot of them, again, got captured. There was one, again, World War II, some Korean War, and I just recently interviewed an American Vietnam War veteran. He was a pilot, and he got shot down, and he was a prisoner of war for 5 years. And he was in his late 30s at the time, a very seasoned military man. But what I gained from that interview is mental strength, which was just fascinating for me to kind of learn about. His kind of resilience. I want to make it towards the end. He had a wife at home, and he was very open to kind of share his stories. He's out in Arizona now. Tom Kirk, for those who want to search up his name later and read more about his story. But that one was very emotional and very impactful to the sort of the story. And again, both fought in Korea and sort of Vietnam. What I've also tried to start to do as well is, again, connect more with high schools and museums. How can I share? How can I connect further with the next generation? What's going to kind of get them interested in these veteran stories? That's when I launched my TikTok channel and posting more on Facebook and YouTube. In the local communities, why don't you put a QR code on some of the banners that you see in the local towns around Remembrance Day or Veterans Day, and so people can walk up, scan, and read about the story, and you can link it to a video. So I've actually installed 2 of these through different cities in Ontario, and again, just another way for people to stop for a second, learn about a story of a veteran, take some time out of their day, and really connect, and again, reflect and remember. But this was my fiance's idea, and it was a great idea at that.
A great idea, Zach. And one of the things that I was thinking about in Heroes Path is using these QR codes. And these, by the way, do exist. It's not altogether an original idea, but putting them on headstones. Not everybody's going to want a QR code on their headstone. And then the other thing that was brought up to me actually by somebody who runs a business creating these headstones is that QR codes might be good for 5 or 10 years, but then they might be replaced by something else. But the whole idea of like maybe putting a stake in the ground next to a headstone so you can listen and access that veteran story, I think is a good one as well, especially after all of these veterans have left us.
Absolutely. I've seen this happen a little bit in Europe, actually. I've connected with someone in the Netherlands who's put up a lot of different monuments for American veterans, Canadian veterans, whether it's a QR code or some type of open message that's at a monument that reads more about a veteran story that's either living or not living. So I think technology is great in a lot of different ways. It's a tool to be able to share these stories that are from 70, now 80 years ago, and just a way to educate people on this history.
Right.
One of the kind of big turning points was in late 2023. I had a really good friend of mine, Scott Masters, out of Toronto, and he's a history teacher. And he's been interviewing veterans for about 20 years or so with his students. So we ended up connecting, and together we've been able to meet and interview over 65 veterans together, whether we do them over Zoom, whether we do them in person with his students. And again, just another way to open up veterans for kids from grade 9 to grade 12, 15, 16, 17, 18 to get involved and pique their interest. Again, my interest just started from, obviously I've been a big fan of history, liked history classes, but finding my grandfather's medals and photos. And I hope people that are listening to this or watching this spark some creativity or spark something. I'm going to go ask my parents. I'm going to ask my grandparents. I want to search up my name on Google and see what comes up and see who I'm connected to, because that was my whole reason there.
Let me ask you too, Zach. So you're reaching these students in the classrooms. I can see the gymnasium in the background. You're also reaching them on TikTok, on YouTube, and you've got these 75, 85-year-old stories. It's something that you would think that most history teachers dream of, but how do you figure out how to make this information really resonate for these kids? One of the things I know is it has to be short because you have short attention spans. What are the things that you've learned in your interaction with students at varying grade levels?
Yeah, I would say keeping it simple and short. I have these long documentaries that I post on YouTube that are between 20 and 40 minutes or whatever the case may be. But what I've seen a lot of really good reactions is, again, through the TikTok. There's always going to be a new social media platform that comes out each year or every couple of years. But I think keeping it short, keeping it engaging, and giving the students or the people watching a reason to watch. What I like to do with my videos is put the age of the veteran, put that in perspective. And again, it's just a 30 or 45-second clip that this is who the veteran is. Here's how old they were when they joined, and here's what they experienced. And just keeping it short and simple. And then that will spark maybe the interest to go read more about it. So that's how I found connecting with these students and younger generation. Short and simple, and keep it engaging, and pictures, different captions and whatnot. It really has helped over the last couple of years. Through my connection with the history teacher, originally it was remembering Canada's veterans, then it's turned into global veteran stories, interviewed probably 2 or 3 dozen veterans from the US, from the Netherlands, the UK, Ireland, Scotland, Poland, South Korea, and very recently India. Unique country and unique sort of veterans and services. So that was a big milestone for me. And obviously, again, connecting with different cultures is really important to share their stories. And then in 2024, I interviewed my 50th veteran, a female World War II veteran. And again, I kept continuing to do these Zoom interviews where I would also bring on high school students to ask the questions. So it wasn't just me talking the entire time. I gave students the opportunity to ask some questions and share their story.
Tell me, what was her story in the picture?
Yeah, it was a really interesting one, actually, John. So this is Mary Owen, stationed in Canada, but she had actually a very top secret job. She couldn't tell anybody for a number of years. And essentially what she did in the east coast of Canada in Halifax, she was monitoring various types of equipment that would send signals to merchant ships that were coming off the coast of Canada and the US that were taking supplies to Europe. So her job was to monitor this technology and send signals to each ship. But it was this new sort of radar technology that no one could know about, especially the Germans and the enemy. So she was part of a very small women's only unit in the east coast of Canada. She told me many times, she said, I was rifle trained. And each day we had to sit on the coast and make sure that no one would invade. And just a small, cute old lady, but she said, I had my rifle ready. And if anyone was going to attack, I was going to be ready. Yeah, she's turning, I think, 99 in a couple weeks. So just an amazing story. And she was quite a character for sure.
But Zach, it begs another question. See, a lot of these people that you are talking to are 99, 100, more than 100 years old. And it strikes me that these may be their final words. It might be their final recording. And I can't tell you how many times that's happened with me. And my question is, how does that responsibility affect you as the interviewer and as a person?
Yeah, it's a great question, John. I think it's a big responsibility and one I don't take lightly for sure. I think with each interview that I show, I know that it's not just sharing their story, but it's the family legacy. It's preserving that period of time and that conflict or that war, but it's also that person. So I think asking the right questions and phrasing their story in such a way where it reflects them as a human being. The typical questions I like to ask is, how do you like to be remembered? A lot of the veterans are well into their hundreds. I always ask, what's your secret to longevity? Anytime I meet World War II veterans that are sometimes are still married for 75, 80 years, I say, what's your secret to a long marriage?
What are their answers to all those questions, by the way?
So there's a standard one that I chuckle at, and I chuckle with my fiance all the time. And I ask a lot of the men, and they say, close your mouth and listen and make sure you really take care of them. I think every single time I ask that question, those are the kind of key things. Make sure they're doing okay. Treat them with so much love and compassion each and every day. And they've had very healthy marriages through 60, 70, 80 years. And it's always great to see. Because of my job in sales, I've been able to travel throughout the US, and I've had the fortune to meet and interview American World War II veterans. I was in North Carolina last November and met a P-47 pilot, Ed Cottrell. Just only a couple months later, he then passed away at 103. So I was one of the last people to interview him. Then just a couple months ago, I was in Minnesota and met so many incredible World War II and Korean War veterans to be able to share their stories. And they're always so open to share. And again, their stories are just incredible. I always get asked, what's the oldest veteran that I've interviewed? I interviewed the oldest living
Oh my gosh.
Canadian World War II veteran. You can see on the screen there. He just turned 110 And funny enough, I interviewed him actually in Canada, but he was actually born in Ohio and came to Canada when he was 4 years old. Just to give people a idea of the time frame, it was because of the Spanish flu. And I think he said it was 1917, 1918 or so, but this is Burdett Sisler.
The last names are Burdett and Sisler. Sisler.
And what is your birthday? When were you born?
I was born April 14, 1915. That's 1915.
And so how old does that make you today?
I'm 109 years old last April.
And you'll be 110 next April. That is incredible.
That's amazing.
Meeting someone that was born in the 1910s, that doesn't happen every single day. I think, John, we talked about maybe a couple days or a couple weeks ago, what's maybe the story that sticks out the most? What is the story that I like to tell, or the one that maybe sits with me the most?
Yeah.
And that's definitely Jack Thomas. There's a few others. It's so hard to pick, but just the one that hasn't been shared, never been interviewed, and one that, I'm not going to lie, I cried during this interview. There was a lot of veterans that they're very emotional, but the story of Jack Thomas, born on a farm in southern Ontario, joined the Royal Canadian Air Force in 1941, served as a tail gunner. His first 19 or 20 missions was flying between England and Spain, supplying food to the underground. And then he flew a mission on D-Day and then on Operation Market Garden. So basically his story, his plane caught on fire. He was flying incredibly low. He had to bail out. His parachute got caught on the plane. He injured his leg. He got swung under the belly of the plane. He eventually had to cut his strap, and he fell from, I think it was 200 or 300 feet, and landed right in a field in the Netherlands. Broke his back. He had internal bleeding, all these different injuries. And then he went to 4 or 5 different prisoner of war camps, healing. And he was, I think, 21 years old at this time. And he said he was still a tall, skinny kid. But when he came out of the prisoner of war camp, he only weighed about 100 pounds. He lost 30 to 40 pounds just because of the conditions in the prisoner of war camp. So this was, I give full credit to the grandson of Jack Thomas, who found my videos on TikTok and said, "Hey, I love your videos. There's my grandfather's a World War II veteran. Do you want to meet him?" And I said, "Absolutely. Let's set something up." Jack decided not to share his story anymore. He said, "I'm just going to share it with you." And I said, "Is it okay if I share it with museums and schools?" He said, "No problem," but it's hard for him to talk about. So that's one where I always like to tell people about it and share that experience because it was just so impactful.
And what an honor that you were the last person that he told that story to.
Absolutely. Yeah, and he was so kind and very generous with his time. I think I sat with him for about 2 hours, which is a long interview for me. I like to keep them short because of the age of the veterans. But that was just an honor and a pleasure to meet. And again, I'll share a couple more slides here. And if there are any questions in the chat, or John, if you have any questions, let me know. But
I do have one question, Zach, and that is,
Yeah.
you're going to these schools, and the other thing that we haven't really talked about yet is that you're actually training these students to record veterans in their own communities. So what would you say are the key principles that you emphasize as you're training them, both technically, but also ethically, perhaps?
absolutely. I think it's with anything just being prepared. I think knowing a little bit about the history and what questions to ask and then what questions to not ask. I think typically when we think of war or we think of Hollywood and movies, you want to know about the combat. You want to learn about the frontline soldiers and what they went through. A lot of those veterans are open to sharing their story, but it's how to ask the question respectfully and how to really, you're having a conversation with each veteran. You're asking them questions, but it's really a back and forth kind of conversation. When I talk to students or anyone who's listening, who's interested and say, "Hey, I want to do what Zach does. I want to interview veterans," I think always take the approach of, first of all, you're a stranger. They don't know you. And, you have to really take the time to think about what you're asking and what the response might be, and always be very kind and respectful. And talking about the technology of it, you don't need to have fancy equipment. $20 tripod from Amazon and a good iPhone or cell phone is really all you need. And to be completely honest, that's exactly what I use. So I think, yeah, anyone who's interested in doing this, I highly recommend it, because for me, there's dozens of me in the US and I'm sure all over the world, but maybe not in your community where you are. So I always encourage people to seek out, ask your local community. And yeah, I think it's how you ask the questions. It's always, for me, it's always encouraged for people to go out and help share their stories.
That's great, Zach. Thanks.
Going back to the Zoom interviews, I was very lucky to interview 2 World War II veterans from Brazil. This was a country that I didn't know served in World War II or what their efforts were. The veteran on the left-hand side of the screen here is Captain Elmo. He's just passed away only 2 weeks after the interview was completed, but he was born and raised in Brazil, and there was a force that actually got shipped to Italy. I didn't even know this until I met these veterans, and both of them served in Italy. One was a rifleman and one was in intelligence. So fighting alongside the Canadians and the Americans and the British in Italy. It's just a story that I had no idea, and I was there with a translator that helped me translate, I believe it was Portuguese, and that was just a great experience. And then in the more recent months, I hit my 100th veteran interview just back in August, and now I believe I'm at 120. I'm starting to lose count. I have a list, but it's a lot of stories right now. And then for people around the world listening to this recording or watching it later on, I interviewed 2 Australian World War II veterans, which was a really great experience for me. Just hearing their accents and their personalities was really interesting.
That's great.
And how I found, just again, these veterans just from newspaper articles I found online. There was one about Australia's last living Spitfire pilot. That was me and my dad's favorite plane growing up. For some reason, we like the colors. So I got to meet and interview the Spitfire pilot. And then another Jack Thomas on the right-hand side of the screen.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I don't think that's the same Jack Thomas that you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Yeah, he's a different Jack Thomas, but he also served in the Air Force. But he was a Halifax pilot.
Wow.
And
he was on the East Coast.
Exactly, yeah. He just had an incredible story and, again, survived all of his missions and was just incredible to listen to, talk to. Yeah. I think we talked about, John, like what's next and how we can work together with your organization and how we can continue sharing these stories.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that too. This is, by the way, for everybody listening, this isn't the last time that you're going to see Zach. What he's doing falls directly into the mission of Heroes Path, and that is we're going to be creating a stories vault, a Heroes Path story vault that is searchable, has multimedia archives of veteran stories, and Zach, with all the work that you've done, you'll provide a great foundation for us in doing that. And there are other people doing this, but it's really a function of how do you convey that level of concern and care and empathy in those interviews. And a question that I've got for you is that for anybody who's watching tonight that wants to help, whether you're a teacher or a student, a veteran family member, what would you say is the simplest way that they can begin preserving a story tomorrow or even today?
I think that's a great question. I think just being curious, that's my probably best advice. That's how my project started. I asked the question to myself, what did my granddad do? I found out even more recently that my 2 uncles were World War II veterans and my nanny served with the British Land Army. So I think for anyone right now, the simplest thing that you can do is talk to your parents, talk to your cousins, your family members, aunts and uncles. Just ask, do we have servicemen and women in our family? Ask to sit down with them and just learn their story.
Yeah.
Ask them just a couple questions.
I love, by the way, the fact that in a lot of these pictures, these veterans are wearing their awards, which is great. And then the picture of the Indian veteran that you just interviewed him, correct?
Yeah, this was one I met at a veterans parade that we have here in Toronto. A very nice man named Grupa Bala. And again, he looks pretty good. He's 80, 82, 83 years old. And he was basically a
He looks
pilot.
like a Sikh. It's a Sikh, I think.
Yeah, a unique story, right? He was a pilot in the Indian Air Force. So that was a story that was, again, untold. He's never been interviewed before, but I always ask the veterans, if you have medals, if you have a Legion jacket that you'd like to wear, please wear that for the interview because it just looks amazing. And this is accomplishments. And I
That's a
guess
point, by the way, for everybody who's doing these, because it's a visual reminder of what they've been through.
absolutely. And a lot of the times the veterans say, I don't want to show off my medals. And I say, it's not showing off. It's just for us to learn more about it. And again, these veterans are so humble. They don't want to be in the limelight, but they deserve the world. And yeah, it's just been great to sit down with them and hear their stories. So I think for anyone that's listening, just be curious. Google your last name, see what comes up, and ask your family, friends, people in your community, and just see what you can find. There's a lot out there. There's a lot of untold stories that I probably won't get to or other people will get to. So I think it's important for everyone to really try to get involved.
Absolutely. It's just great, important work that you're doing, Zach, and we can't thank you enough for everything. Do you have any other comments here at the conclusion here? And if anybody else has any questions, we can certainly, we have a Q&A question here. Here's from Hector again. He said, have you been given permission by the veterans to post their stories and or artifacts that may share with you during the interviews? So not only their awards, their medals, but also any artifacts that they might have.
Yeah, I always ask sort of permission at the end of the interview. I have this basically permission form or release form that gives me, permission to donate the footage to each of the veterans and the organizations, the, schools and legions that I work with. In terms of artifacts, that's actually a really great question. There was one very recently. I was given the flying officer hat of Rex Arnett that he wore and flew his 23 missions in. So I started to collect a few different medals, again, from my grandfather and also my great-grandfather who served in World War I. So I have them displayed at my home in Toronto there. But yeah, I have been given a couple different things. I'm very grateful to receive those, but I've received a couple different interesting things over the last little bit.
Who knows? You might have the Zach Dunn Museum coming up. I say that lightly, but one of the things too that's always a concern for all of us is if you have these artifacts, where can you donate them or where can you place them where they'll continue to be displayed? Because in the larger museums, they'll file them away, but they'll never see the light of day after that.
Absolutely.
That's always a concern whenever you're talking to a veteran is if they want to donate something to you, do you have a place where people will actually see them and not rather than just to be thrown into a drawer somewhere?
Absolutely. I've became good friends with a 23-year-old. He's younger than me, a 23-year-old in Florida. And he's been interviewing World War II veterans for about 10 years. So since he's been 13. And what he started was a traveling museum, which I thought was very fascinating. So he would speak at a lot of different schools, talk to museums and different organizations, and he would actually bring artifacts with him. So people and kids can actually hold them and pick them up and look at the medals and look at the artifacts and also watch a video of the veterans talking about that particular artifact or the story behind it. So there's so many different ways that not just through a video, but other really interactive ways that we can share these stories. There's hundreds and thousands of people that have these different ideas and that probably don't even know it yet. And that's why I just encourage people to be curious. Yeah, I think it's a good hobby and a good passion to have for anyone out there that you might not even know you have yet.
Well, Zach, we can't thank you enough for your time today. It's really just incredibly important. And everything that you mentioned, they certainly resonate with me because with all the veterans that I've spoken to, I've had the same exact experience and they've all made such an enduring difference for us for the long term. And the important thing is that they all just want to be remembered and they want their contribution to be remembered. You're right. They're very humble people. And I think the way that we can all honor them is exactly through what you're doing, Zach. So we're very grateful to you for doing that. Before we close, I'd like to share a few updates from Heroes Path. If you followed us on social media, that we recently returned from Ukraine, where we met with men and women who are both fighting the war and then also supporting the people of their nation, their courage, their service, their resilience, echo everything that we've talked about tonight in the stories that Zach is telling. It's a reminder, I think, to all of us that the values of the greatest generation, from duty, sacrifice, integrity, aren't confined to history books. They're truly alive in those who stand for freedom today. And one of the things that I walked away with after the trip to Ukraine is that, first of all, Europe is at war. It just happens that Ukraine is at the front end of this. And then the other thing to realize is this is the first ground war that we've had in Europe since World War II. So this is directly relevant. On another note, we're also preparing to unveil our new Heroes Path website. This has been a long time in the making. We could be more proud of it. I think that you will be as well. It'll give you a clear look at everything that we're building, from our educational programs and the story vault that I just mentioned to our growing library of podcasts and these webinars. And speaking of those, many more are coming. So stay tuned. Follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn. And by the way, Zach, tell everybody where we can find you on those platforms.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the best way is on YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok. Global Veteran Stories by Zach Dunn. My name should come up and just maybe part of Heroes Path as well, promoting all the wonderful work that you guys are doing as well. Global Veteran Stories by Zach Dunn, or just type in Zach Dunn into any of your social media platforms, and my name will definitely come up, or I hope it will come up.
I think you and I are connected on there as well, which is positive. But Zach, thanks again for your dedication, for your commitment, and then also sharing your time and all of your stories with us. And to everybody who's watching tonight, thanks for taking the time to listen as well. The voices of these veterans are absolutely gifts, and they're gifts that remind us who we are and what we owe. Listening is really, truly how we honor them and how we carry those lessons forward. So good night. Thank you for being a part of Heroes Path. And until next time, thanks so much.
I have 3 interviews tomorrow, 1 D-Day veteran. Back to Toronto.
All right, brother. We'll talk to you soon. Good luck with all those.